The JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime has always been about making the episodes look as interesting as possible without many animation frames. And the newest example that we're seeing in part 7 just so happens to be 3D CGI. They found a new method of making the episode look exciting without drawing many 2D frames with these complicated designs. So that's great. Let's look at the history of everything that happened in the JoJo anime, which led up to the part 7 anime, and why it's so good. So basically, we'll be reviewing CGI usage of the JoJo anime throughout all of its years that led up to Steel Ball Run, and then we'll also be reviewing Steel Ball Run episode 1 at the same time to see what principles it shares with its prior seasons and what it dropped. Then, at the very end of the video, I'll also be talking about the release schedule, because that's, it's a topic people want to hear about, because nobody knows what the fuck is going on. That's completely understandable, by the way, because we're not being told anything. I think I understand the bedrock a little bit better than the average person, so I'll also be talking about the release schedule and the potential of that, though it's not very good news. Anyways, back in the days, when people used to mention CGI in regards to the JoJo anime, they immediately thought about the 3D openings from parts 1, 2, 3, and 6. And that's fine and all, but I will not be discussing those openings in this video whatsoever. The only reason for that is because those openings were outsourced to Kamikaze Doga. That's a different studio from David Productions, and the directors that worked on those 3D openings had no say on the series itself, like the episodes after the opening. So basically, Kamikaze Doga was doing its completely own thing, and I will only be analyzing what David Production was doing with 3D CGI through these 15 years of the JoJo anime. I'll also be talking about the episode of JoJo before part 7 came out that had the most CGI used in the series, to make it clear that CGI is by no means a new thing in the series. So let's go back a bit. The first season of JoJo. It is impossible to talk about the CGI in it without mentioning one of the core staff members who was at the helm of season 1, Yasufumi Soejima. This man served as the visual director for season 1, so parts 1 and 2, while also being the CGI director, and after season 1, he continued to work on JoJo as one of the best regular episode directors for parts 3 and 4. So Soejima pretty much set the groundwork for a lot of things in the series, but we'll be focusing on the CGI in this video, in regards to Soejima's output. In season 1, most of the scenes that contain CGI are found in part 2. And I have to say that despite this season being from 2012, back when anime CGI was notoriously bad and overall just had a really bad reputation, most of the scenes from this JoJo season still hold up and look pretty good. And I believe a big reasoning is that as far as I know, Soejima himself did all of the 3D work in the season. So, none of the CGI in season 1 of JoJo, or at least like most of it, was not outsourced. It was by David Productions' own staff, so Soejima. Another thing that helped the CGI in season 1 was that it was very exaggerated. For example, the scene with this car being driven, it looks insane. No car moves like this in real life, and this CGI is just really funny. It doesn't look bad, it looks funny. And it is a comedy scene, so that's a good thing. That's a positive emotion for the scene. Also, another thing I noticed with season 1 was that CGI was never the main focus of a shot. There were usually always 2D elements covering the CGI up, or camera shake, or speed lines, or just like, the point being that the CGI was never the focal point, alright? Also, for these scenes in season 1, where there was CGI, the frame rate was heavily limited. The biggest example definitely being this minecart scene, where you can see some basic 2D, 3D blending. The CGI was there mainly to just do its job to allow for more creative scenes, with the limited animation at the time. So, yeah, regarding Season 1, the most CGI heavy episode was the chariot race from Part 2. Yet still, that's not the most CGI heavy episode in the series before Part 7. The most impressive CGI of Season 1 is probably the plane Joseph flies in the finale episode, but like the chariot race is much more interesting from our perspective because there's actual like there are CGI horses in that, just like Part 7. And yeah, it's just very interesting to look at the evolution. So they were utilizing these methods of making the CGI not stand out. Like it was never the main focus of the scene, and there was always something else going on directorially for the viewer to pay attention to. Alright, okay. Then we switched to Part 3 as the anime adaptation. So Part 3 started using CGI more ambitiously for a lot of background art, which occasionally allowed for more dynamic camera rotation. It was kind of like Attack on Titan, but on a much smaller scale. Soejima stepped away from doing all the CGI in the season, but he still occasionally put in some for his own directed episodes. Despite all this greatness, I think some cracks were starting to show in some of Part 3's episodes in regards to CGI, especially with ones with weaker episode directors. Mainly, I'm thinking of episode 13, Wheel of Fortune, where there's many shots where the CGI is the focus, and that's ultimately where I think we had our first CGI mishandling of the series. It may be because the car was originally going to be 2D animated as the director's commentary suggests, but they ran out of time and had to make it CGI. So literally, it was meant to be 2D, so the viewer was meant to be looking at the car, but then they were like, oh god, we need to put a 3D model instead. So then the viewer is forced to look at the 3D model of the car, because that was always the intent of the storyboard. They just never expected the car to be 3D in the final episode. And I believe that because most of the cars in Part 3 are actually 2D. But this episode was so car focused that they were like, okay, we need to make it 3D. Anyways, I think Part 3's best CGI integration was definitely in episode 8 with Polnareff vs. Ebony Devil, which was directed by the previous season's CGI director Soejima. Soejima comes up again. Okay, next season. For as good as Part 4 was, I don't think that CGI-wise it did anything particularly interesting. It was mostly just used as a crutch to animate hard scenes such as Shigechi's stand and some dice. Perhaps they thought that the Part 4 art style worked like much better in 2D or... I don't know what... That's just speculation. But the point is that they didn't really utilize 3D CGI in any significant way in Part 4, as far as I remember. I'd kind of say the same about Part 3, because while the early episodes did use ambitious 3D shots, in the later episodes they really don't. There are some exceptions like Polnareff vs. Anubis, which had like 3D rotation shots, but they're kind of rare. So, okay, next season. By Part 5, the anime had become much more modern in a multitude of different ways. And they presumably were inspired by what other anime were doing with CGI at the time, and thus, in Part 5, every single vehicle is in CGI. This is a contrast to previous seasons, where the cars and such were usually drawn in 2D. In other episodes, we started to see more 3D backgrounds again, like in Part 3. And also, when I said all the vehicles are in CGI, that also includes Naranja's stand Aerosmith, which is a plane, and that was actually our first fully CGI stand in the series. So by this point, CGI in anime, like I believe it was the very end of 2018, by this point CGI in anime had evolved to look pretty good. 2D, 3D blending looked really good. So even in episodes like 18, where a lot of the episodes is spent around a CGI vehicle, I think it all looks pretty nice. I didn't have any issues with the CGI even when I watched it when I was much younger when it came out, even though I was very much a CGI hater at the time for anime. Also, shots focusing directly on the CGI didn't look bad either. I think that episode 18 of Part 5 is the best use of CGI in the part, and I don't consider any of the scenes in Part 5 to suffer from any CGI mishandling. Alright. So, okay, next season, part 6. This is where CGI began to get talked about a lot in JoJo. So by this point, CGI in other anime, it was like 2022, I believe, might be off, but like, CGI in anime had become so good that, honestly, I think the studio got a bit too overconfident. What do I mean? Well, they outsourced all of the CGI in part 6, and they also hired some random CGI director. Well, okay, they're not random, but very unqualified CGI director. The same person who did the ugly CGI bear in Golden Kamuy, which was like the shining example of bad anime CGI at the time. So that's not very reassuring, though. Of course, there were many years in between that Golden Kamuy bear episode and a part 6 anime. But still, the same person, not very reassuring. Though that doesn't mean there's only bad CGI in part 6. The beginning episodes have quite promising showcases, actually, such as John Gallier's stand Manhattan Transfer, having some of the most cinematic shots in the part, enhancing the source material with how precisely it's adapted. I'd also say the usage of CGI became very random in part 6. Most people remember the unintentionally uncanny look of Lang Wrangler's 3D model, which, by the way, is the first time there's a 3D human character in focus, in front and center of a shot in the series. But there's also just a weird philosophy regarding CGI in general during part 6 anime, probably because of the unskilled CGI director. So, basically in part 6, some stands have CGI models, but they only show up for like 1 or 2 scenes. It doesn't make any sense. And why does like the CGI disappear like 3D anime? Why does it all go away almost entirely after the 12th episode, so after the first batch? It's just so confusing going back to some of those early part 6 episodes, seeing CGI, and then in the final third of part 6 there's almost none. Aside from like vehicles and other like stuff that was being done in 3D in every other anime as well. Well, okay, Kenso's Dragon's Dream from Batch 2 is another 3D stand, which I'd say looks pretty nice. I mean, it's gonna be consistent, it looks different between shots, but it looks nice. Fun fact, by the way, Season 1 CGI director, Yasufumi Soejima, returned to do some boards for this episode, the Dragon's Dream episode 17. So there's some creative 3D infographics given to us, which I suspect to be his doing, though I don't have any evidence for this. Also, okay, just for comparison, let's compare CGI cars from previous JoJo parts. Here on the left we have a part 3 vehicle, and in the middle we have a part 5 vehicle, and on the right we have a part 6 vehicle. Do you see how confusing this is? Part 6's car is just going at full frame rate, and the rest are limited like usually in an anime. It's definitely a completely different approach, probably due to the unskilled CGI director, who definitely didn't do any research on how CGI was done in JoJo, and also, well, all the CGI in part 6 was outsourced, so of course they didn't really know anything about the previous seasons. So yeah, that's part 6. So it is wild. So funnily enough, in my opinion, Season 1 covering parts 1 and 2 had the best CGI usage of the series before part 7, which is so uncanny because it's older, it's much older. After Season 1, the second best is part 5, then third best is part 3, second last is part 4, and then last place is part 6. So that's something to consider. It's mainly just because of like Season 1 didn't outsource the CGI. There was direct communication between the CGI team and the director. Okay, so then the part 7 anime came out, and it broke all the records in CGI usage. And it was very interesting. When I was watching it the first time, I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, the things that made me hopeful were stuff such as Kimura specifically saying he had been thinking about CGI horses with Kato for years. I mean, that's a very funny line, by the way, because that kind of sounds like Kato was just thinking about horses while he was series directing part 6, but whatever. I guess they were always prioritizing part 7. That's probably not actually true, but it's a funny reading one could make. So, in part 7, the CGI is outsourced, like in part 6. However, they definitely cooperated with the director more. Like Kimura said in a recent interview, him and Kato tried to make a rough draft for a Steel Ball Run race scene with CGI horse shots, and their first result looked really bad. So they basically made for their directors a guide on things for what to do and what not to do to make the CGI look good, which sounds great. Another thing, well, this doesn't really relate to the CGI, but in another interview, Kimura said that they invented, or like I think it was he himself. He analyzed the movement of horses, and he invented a limited animation horse style, like a horse galloping style, which works in limited animation. So basically, the implication I get from this quote from the interview is that in the studio right now, they have a guide sheet specifically to tell the animators on how to draw horses running with as few frames as possible. And that's amazing, because JoJo at the end of the day is a limited TV production. It will always have to take shortcuts and convince the viewer to like it in other ways than production values. So, and obviously in Steel Ball Run there's so many horses, so of course it's great that they're figuring out ways to make them limited. So that's great. They're doing all of this stuff. Part 7 CGI philosophy is pretty much the same as Season 1 CGI philosophy, but now we see it even clearer on what they actually want to do with it. So, in the Part 7 anime, and this will sound really strange to some people, but I would honestly say that the CGI is never the focal point. It's the storyboarder, which is the same as the director, at least in the first episode, very clearly analyze where the viewer would be looking at the scenes. And usually the 3D models are located in the areas the viewer isn't looking at. There's usually 2D and 3D at the same time within the same shot. But the viewer is made to look at the 2D, and it's just masterful execution of like the director guiding the eye on where to look. And it's usually never the 3D elements. I can notice specifically in the first half of the episode, which was produced, information dump by the way. Steel Ball Run episode 1 with its 47-minute runtime, it was just, studio-wise, it was just produced as 2 separate episodes. They have a different staff list per, half. So the first half of episode 1 had some scenes where the CGI was clearly used as a crutch. Such as the scene with like the tension build-up scene in the race, which is actually my favorite scene of the episode. But I will say that there is clearly a crutch. 3D was used as a crutch because 3D model gyro is front and center to the camera. Like there's nowhere else you can look other than this 3D model. There was no reason for this scene to be 3D, but it doesn't look that bad. Now obviously if they had more time, this would have been a 2D drawing. But it is showing that, in emergencies, they will still use CGI like this, but the second half of the episode, which focuses on the horse racing specifically, is very clear that the 2D elements are always the focal point. And whenever there's only 3D models racing, there's like speed lines, ground movement, camera shake, or reaction shots on top of the 3D models. There's so much stuff happening. Also, there's color swaps. Like, the 3D is not being a hindrance whatsoever. They're just doing this like a JoJo episode on steroids, and the CGI is helping them. It's a helpful asset, which is catapulting the anime to new heights, excitement-wise. Let's review Steel Ball Run episode 1 a bit. One might look at it as a continuation of the JoJo anime formula. And I understand completely. If you've watched all of JoJo and then open Steel Ball Run, you might be like, oh hey, this is a JoJo episode. Sure, yeah, it has a lot of the same elements as prior seasons. However, the observation I made was that this is a completely different beast. For one, there's so much more movement. There are so many more scenes specifically designed around movement, and there's such few shots taken from the manga, where the shots that are taken from the manga just almost look like jarring in comparison to the rest. It's a completely different approach to previous seasons. Never in JoJo before did I expect to see such originality in storyboarding. I always wanted originality in the color swaps and visual design otherwise, but the storyboarding itself and transitions and whatnot, but the storyboarding itself, like having completely unique angles for pretty much the entire episode, that's unheard of. I never expected them to go this route, especially after part 6. But I am fully convinced that they did the right choice, because now, finally, JoJo, the anime, can take full utilization of the anime medium, and that's, at the end of the day, what an anime adaptation should be. I will make this clear. I have already argued with at least one person who does not like this new approach of new shots. Genuinely, the argument went somewhat like this. I'll try to be fair to the other person and not make them sound stupid, but honest, I swear the argument went like this. They said there's no point in creating these unique angles from the manga if they're just gonna look worse art-wise. Their argument was that if you trace the manga panel, the art is gonna look better and the angle is gonna be cooler, like in the manga. While, okay, like if you don't understand anything about directing, this sounds somewhat reasonable. But the thing is, for an ideal anime adaptation to be considered well directed and utilizing its medium properly, all of the shots have to make sense within the context of each other. They have to follow from one another and flow seamlessly into one another. There should never be random shot changes just because the manga changed the shot randomly, or the angle. Now, when we look at the previous season, part 6, we can see that that's pretty much what that season was doing. The most they did to help with like the anime adaptation flow was flipping the panels horizontally, so that like it would still technically be following all the storyboarding rules of an anime. Well, they sometimes even failed at that, but the point is that like at the most we've got previously to make the shots flow better to each other was that the panel would be flipped so that it doesn't break the rule of 180. Here in Steel Ball Run, everything is completely different. What I'm seeing is that there's clear scale and power dynamics being represented on the screen. We very clearly see, for example, the race build-up scene. Gyro is above his horse, and Johnny is on the ground. And we can literally see it. Like, we are looking from Johnny's perspective. Gyro is above him in that scene, and Johnny is trying to look for ways to reach that same level. And once he finally does, the tension music ends, and then it gets triumphant. Stuff like this, these feelings that an anime adaptation can invoke, are not possible if it's just going by the manga panels. And, okay, I said this to the guy in the argument, but I'll say it again here. I am not saying that the manga panels are bad. I'm saying that they work best for a manga. For a manga, these panels work perfectly. And Hirohiko Araki took that into account, that he's making a manga right now. The most important takeaway is that Hirohiko Araki was not, while making his manga, Hirohiko Araki was not storyboarding a future anime adaptation 20 years away from when he was making those panels. He was purely making a well-readable, stylish manga. So, yes, that's what's happening here. Part 7 is not doing that. It's not ripping off Araki's work. It is instead interpreting the story through the new medium to give off the same feeling as the manga. Also, the 3D CGI, it literally just like helped the episode a lot. There was so much more 2D animation, like well-made 2D animation. Like, this is so sad to say, but right now on Sakugaboru, there are more documented, well-animated scenes of Steel Ball Run episode 1 than the first 12 episodes of Stone Ocean combined. So they're clearly doing something correctly, because the CGI horses are allowing them to focus their 2D animation juice into cool scenes, instead of having to force their best 2D animators to animate simple horse running loops. Trust me, the 2D horse running loops would not have been worth it. It's not interesting to look at, and 3D does it just fine. It gets the same message across that there's many horses on the screen and they're running. You don't need those scenes to be 2D. What you do want to be in 2D is stuff like Gyro throwing his steel ball at the rock, and stuff like Urmud Abdul's camel directly attacking Gyro's horse. Stuff like that CGI would look bad in, so they don't do it. So also, another thing which makes the Steel Ball Run episode 1 a Trojan horse is the fact that while it does use all of the directing techniques of previous JoJo seasons, most of the time it does those techniques multiple at the same time. So for example, a shot could have a reaction circle, a reaction split screen, speed lines in the background, a sound effect, like an onomatopoeia, all in the same shot. In previous JoJo seasons, it was not uncommon to see only one of these make up a shot, but in this part, they're using multiple in the scenes that are being directorially referential to previous seasons. So overall, Steel Ball Run episode 1, I really liked it. I think the JoJo anime is heading to the correct direction, and my only hope is that the rest of the episodes are of the same quality. I just hope the fall off by episode 30 something isn't as crazy as some other seasons of JoJo. I hope the quality stays on this level for a long time, because this first episode was genuinely excellent. Alright, now let's go back to part 3. Alright, because part 3 includes the episode with the most CGI before the part 7 anime. What is that episode? It's episode 40, Darby the Player part 1. Now, you probably should have expected this, considering it is the episode where they play a video game for the whole duration. So the director for that episode was Yasufumi Soejima, which, okay, that was amazing staff allocation. They put the previous season's CGI director to direct the CGI heavy episode of part 3. I just wish they did the same thing for the Wheel of Fortune episode, but obviously we already covered that, okay? Also, this is Soejima's last storyboard for part 3 too, and this is actually a very interesting part 3 episode on a multitude of levels, because it adapts 4.5 chapters, which is a lot for part 3, because as people point out these days, part 3's anime adaptation is paced much lower than the prior part and the parts after, but the 4.5 chapter adaptation rate makes it on par with like a Diamond is Unbreakable episode in pacing. I mean, they even skipped the opening for the episode to put more stuff in. So let's talk about this episode a bit and how it matters even in the context of Steel Ball Run. So by episode 40 of part 3, production was struggling quite a bit, even with the small break of a few months from airing before they entered Egypt. Lots of part 3 episodes in the second half feel more limited and have more off-model artwork. Here, for example, there's a good perspective shot of Ponarf reaching his hand, but the animator didn't quite achieve the result Soejima was going for. At least I'd imagine. I mean, I can certainly see that this is a cool angle, but the drawing kind of looks wonky, so I can't really appreciate it as much. The production struggle also shows in the way that there is no concretely fluid 2D animation in this episode. However, the storyboard more than makes up for it in this case, I'd say, which of course should be the standard for JoJo that the storyboard is carrying. Okay, so the first half of the episode has lots of dialogue and explanations, which is made more exciting by distorted viewpoints. And also, the characters are doing stuff while they'll talk, such as summoning their stands and intimidating each other with them. Sun posing and Jotaro's clenching his fist. So this episode of part 3 had a lot of unique animation styles. Obviously CGI with the video game, But the Darby's doll collection is another example of a unique animation style being employed in this episode. They were actually done by one of Araki's former assistants, Rekitaki, with them mostly being animated with rigging. So, with the bone movements, as kind of like a Western animation. BoJack Horseman, yeah, etc. So yeah, the storyboard is great. There's good usage of anticipation. Like, something will be happening at the edge of the camera, and then the camera pans to it. Like, there's great ways of building tension. So, the video game begins, and immediately, the viewer doesn't really think much about it being CGI. I didn't, and none of the YouTube reactors who watched it have pointed it out. And this immediately tells us that this was the correct decision to do. Generally, a viewer expects a video game to be in 3D. Even if the story is taking place in 1989, they're not gonna be like, wait, what the fuck, why is it in 3D? This makes no sense. That's not the first thing for most viewers, unless you really care about technological accuracy. And trust me, I know a lot about technological accuracy of game console at the time, but it still didn't bother me. Okay, so it's very similar to some great anime that utilized 3D in the past. Like, even as the camera cuts from the 2D characters back to the game, none of it feels jarring. It reminds me a lot of Initial D's first season, in the sense that, like, the viewer is clearly being taught what to expect to be 3D and what to expect to be 2D. In Initial D's first season, the viewer obviously recognizes that, okay, all of the cars will be 3D, but whenever it cuts to the characters, it will be 2D. It never feels weird, because that's just a rule that directing teaches the viewer. So, whilst the animations in the video game in this JoJo Part 3 episodes are quite simple, it's all covered up with great visual directing. Like, there's so many creative effects on screen for every single scene. For example, when they begin the race, there's speed lines and camera rotation. Well, the speed lines distort the entire picture, in fact, and Kakyoin doing the spin maneuver has amazing impact. The CGI is covered by television scan lines and a CRT filter on faraway shots when it shows the 2D characters interacting with the game. Like, all of these visual effects may seem standard practice, but in truth, every decision here on how to portray this 3D has been a conscious decision by episode director Soejima. Well, obviously the director decides everything, but I feel like most viewers don't realize that these choices, a lot of choices in anime, are made for a reason. For this particular scenario, the reason being that the viewer very clearly recognizes that the 3D world is a separate world, the video game world. So, okay, there are moments where elements of the game invade the outside world as well, such as in the shot of Kakyoin and the speedometer, and it all looks fine. 2D elements are placed above the 3D shots constantly, such as the characters themselves or the game controller. There's great depth of field in the video game, with the camera always focusing on what you should take away from the scene. For example, there's a scene of cars turning at a corner, and the focal point is the corner itself. It doesn't just always follow the cars. It shows that them turning this corner was important. It's very clearly not trying to make the CGI look impressive. It's just trying to tell the story in the most effective manner. So that's like really important actually for good 3D usage. And it's what Part 7 does as well. They're not trying to make the viewer think, oh my god, this is the best CGI I've ever seen. They're making the viewer try to get into the world without distractions. And also, the tunnel lightout scene in this Part 3 episode is very well done. The music goes away and the sound design lets us take in all the suspense. So yeah, honestly, JoJo was always pretty good with CGI. There were clear mishaps, and well, Part 6 was an entire mishap in terms of CGI. But the point is that, like, JoJo anime, like, storyboarding wise, has always known what it's been doing. And with Part 7, they really, even though it's a completely different director for CGI, they just really understand that good storyboarding goes a long way. And there's many other good elements to Part 7 as well, other than the storyboarding, such as the 2D animation highlights, and such as the amazing sound design, the great soundtrack. There's so many great aspects to the Part 7 episode. Well, the Part 3 episode was great as well. but it's very clearly a different approach to what Part 7 is doing right now. But the basic principles are understood by the Part 7 anime. That's my point here, pretty much. So we go back to the initial briefing. The JoJo anime has always been trying to make the episode look visually interesting without much 2D animation. And the 3D CGI of Part 7 is honestly the best idea they've ever had in terms of how to make the anime interesting. I fully support the 3D CGI utilization, and I never thought it would be this good. But seeing it in practice has blown away all of my doubts. There's actually a scene in the trailer for the second stage which shows how I thought all of these scenes would be done. It's the shot of all the horses starting to run, and it's a still image. This is from the second stage trailer. So I really did think that all of the horse racing would be like this in the Part 7 anime. But the fact that they found such an exciting 3D approach that they can do whatever the scene needs, it's amazing. It's amazing. So the Steel Ball Run first episode, it really is one of JoJo's best from a production standpoint. Well, okay, not from a production standpoint in the sense of like behind the scenes, but like the final result is amazing. That's what I mean. So when people say stuff like, this might be the best episode of JoJo's and stuff like this, I genuinely think there's some truth to that. There are obviously episodes from prior parts which are better in different categories, but the overall vibe of this first Steel Ball Run episode is amazing. I even told someone like, what the hell happened? Like, it feels like Toshiyuki Kato and the rest of the directorial team of Part 7 specifically read my Twitter thread where I reviewed every single Part 6 episode stating all of my issues, and then they just like didn't do any of those issues ever again. Like, what? Like, it's so weird, because like the Part 7 anime, genuinely, personally, on a personal level, it's everything I've ever wanted from a JoJo anime. And I'm just so surprised that it's happening right in front of my eyes. Like, this is a great gift for me, and I expect that for the rest of the JoJo community as well. So, yeah, Part 7 Episode 1 is great, and the previous seasons of JoJo were great too in their own ways. Part 6 kind of a blemish. You can watch my Part 6 anime review video from like, I don't know, 2 years ago if you care about why I'm so rude to Part 6 anime. But, anyways, next topic. The release schedule. Okay. Steel Ball Run episode schedule. So, obviously Netflix has not given us any information. All they've said is 2026, so that could be 2 days from now or 200 days from now, as one of the other JoJo YouTubers beautifully put it. Yeah, that's an actual, it's probably Chewy Dog. But there's a leak currently about the release schedule, and it says that the next episodes, the next batch, will be 11 episodes, and then it will come out in September 2026. Now, I can't really tell why I believe this leak to be real, but there are a lot of aspects that make me believe in this leak. I was looking at both sides. There was, by the very end, there was some evidence found that it could have been weekly with the NHK television corporation buying Steel Ball Run, but I just think it will be batches. The only possible way that this could be somehow weekly is that, you know, they somehow decide last minute, okay, let's make it weekly so that the last episode of batch is September 2026. But I do believe this release schedule to be fully real for reasons I can't really discuss. But I would also like to point out the fact that while this is horrible, we got to get one episode in March, and then we have to wait until September to get more. Like, that's diabolical. I also want to remind the community that for Part 6 we had it much worse. In Part 6 we got the first episodes in December, and then the next episodes in September. So obviously in Part 7, March to September, it's a shorter wait than December to September. The argument could be made that like with Part 6 we got more episodes at first, so it was more okay. But I kinda disagree. I mean, as I said, there was less animation in those Part 6 episodes than this entire first episode of Part 7. And also, the community didn't really care that the episodes weren't coming out. Meanwhile, with Part 7 right now, everyone is very outraged and they want the next episodes very soon. I always knew that the issue with Perception was never actually the patch release. It's kind of like when someone breaks up with you and give a vague reason as to why they're breaking up, but it doesn't make sense. Well, that's because it's not the actual reason. That's the same reason why people ultimately talked about the Part 6 anime. Oh yeah, the patch release ruined it. When no, you don't even think that yourself. If you would have liked the anime, you would have watched it. And a lot of people can't notice the issues with the Part 6 anime directly, so they get a subconsciously negative impact from it. Well, not a negative impact, but they're not having as much fun as when they're watching Part 5, for example. So, okay, yeah, next 11 episodes September, then next 12 episodes will be 2027 June, then next 10 episodes 2027 October, then final 9 episodes May 2028. That's honestly what I believed. I believe this leak. It could be completely wrong, and they could do the weekly thing where just the last episode of batch releases that month, so it would be weekly leading up to that final date of the month. That's the only for some reason, and well, I have some reasons to believe this. I genuinely think this is the real release schedule on the screen right now. So happy JoJoing. I just hope that the community can love this anime. I really like the first episode, and I hope we can like the anime despite the episode release structure, because historically, from a historical standpoint, this is one of the biggest leaps in JoJo anime quality-wise we've seen, and I really like it. So thanks for watching. I guess this was a review of definitely Stardust Crusaders episode 40, but it may have also been a review of Steel Power on episode 1. But consider both of those episodes reviewed for now, especially Stardust Crusaders episode 40. I'm not touching that episode again. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you liked, though I will just upload everything I do, so you won't like all the videos. But press the like button definitely, and comment about any questions or observations. Just comment if you have something to say. Okay, bye bye.